Hello there, this is Fiona, host and main GM for What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. This is a bonus Q&A episode to tide us over to the next one-shot, and it is indeed a very special Q&A, as this week I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing co-founder and CEO of Free League Publishing, Tomas Härenstam, about the upcoming Dragonbane RPG, a reimagining of the influential Dragonbane. Dragonbane is Scandinavia's first and biggest tabletop RPG, originally launched in 1982. Now, 40 years later, Free League Publishing have announced a brand new and reimagined edition, with one foot firmly planted in the heritage of decades of Swedish gaming, and the other in modern game design, for which Free League Publishing is known for worldwide. The very first edition of the game was a translation of Magic World by Chaosium, but Dragonbane soon took on a life of its own, evolving through a dozen various editions in Sweden over the decades. Now, Dragonbane will be made available to an international audience under the English title of Dragonbane. Free League describes Dragonbane as a classic fantasy RPG full of magic, mystery, and adventure. This new edition is designed from the ground up to facilitate fast and furious play, with very little prep time and adventures that are a breeze to run. With a toolbox that allows GMs to tell fantasy stories of all kinds, Dragonbane is a game with room for laughs at the table, and even a pinch of silliness at times. Though the Kickstarter campaign for Dragonbane is over for the time being, and a scheduled release date for the core book being approximately August 2023, you can still access the better Quick Start PDF, including a complete introductory adventure and 5 pre-generated characters to play. I'll put a link to the Quick Start and to Free League's newsletter on the What Am I Rolling website and in this episode's show notes. Brilliant. All right, well, we'll start with a very simple question. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Tomas Härenstam. I'm one of the founders of Free League Publishing, a role-playing game publisher primarily from Stockholm, Sweden.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, really. It's actually an honor to have you on this podcast because we've played through quite a number of Free League games, and it's been quite exciting to read stuff, particularly about obviously Alien, which you were the lead designer on, and also Blade Runner as well. But I guess we'll just start very simply. Like, how did you get into role-playing games to begin with, and then obviously get all the way up to creating Free League?
Oh, it's been a bit of a long history. I started playing back in the 1980s. It was a big thing, RPGs here in Sweden at that time. We had 2 games that were big here, Swedish games that were, and one of them was Dragonbane, which we are doing now a new edition of under the English name Dragonbane, and also the other one that was big back then was Mutant, which was my very first RPG when I was like 11. And we actually made a new edition of that game also called Mutant Year Zero that came out. Well, it's actually 8 years ago now. So, but those were my first 2 games, and I kind of never looked back. I haven't played continuously. I had a bit of a break in the 90s, but I did other things. But then I kind of came back into role playing in the 2000s, and then kind of that started doing some freelancing and doing this for fun. But then that kind of grew into the circle of people who became Free League. We did freelance stuff for others, and then we decided at some point to actually start a small business. It was very much something we did on our free time, first 5 years or something, and then it kind of grew and took off a bit. And we did our first game in English, which was Mutant Year Zero, and that kind of built Free League, and things started happening. And Tales from the Loop happened, then Alien happened, and Blade Runner, and now we're here.
Yeah, well, what a quick overview, which I appreciate you probably have to say every single time, but it's such a fascinating history. I guess, do you have a particular genre that you go towards then? Obviously, I know there's obviously lots of sci-fi, lots of sort of, obviously with the Swedish influence as well. We will go on to Dragonbane in a second, but is there a particular genre that you're like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to write for, or want to lead projects on at all?
Really, I kind of I like most kinds of genres really. So it's been quite strange and interesting to do games like Blade Runner, which I spent a lot of this year on doing. It's now kind of done. It's being printed, and I mean, I'm a big Blade Runner fan from way back. So it was a big, huge, super exciting, and a big honor to do a game based on Blade Runner. But then doing now Dragonbane, which is very different in its tone. It's a fantasy game. It's more lighthearted, not super serious. And it's very different from Blade Runner, but I enjoy both tremendously. And I kind of enjoy moving from genre to genre to get some, variety in this. So yeah, doing different kinds of games has always been interesting to me. And I was interested only in like settings and genre, but also in like the mechanics and the structure of how role-playing games are designed and played. That's always been fascinating to me.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk then about Dragonbane. So you sort of mentioned before, obviously, your first game, Mutant Year Zero, obviously was a reimagining of that particular setting. And now, 40 years later, you're doing the reimagining of Dragonbane. So for those people, I appreciate, for a Swedish audience, everyone knows Dragonbane. Yeah. And I know you've already talked about this in other interviews, but for those people outside of Sweden who don't know what Dragonbane is, could you give us what is Dragonbane and how does it stand out from other RPGs?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it started out really, I mean, the Swedish name is Drakar och Demoner, which literally translates as dragons and demons. And that, that started way back. There was a person, his name is Fredrik Malmberg, and he was an intern at Chaosium who did RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu and those games. He was an intern, I think, in the very early 80s. He came back to Sweden and was like, this role-playing thing seems great. We have to do it here. And he and some others started a company called Äventyrsspel, which means adventure games. And they basically wanted to launch their own RPG. Mm-hmm. So what they did was that the first edition of Drakar och Demoner was a translation of a game called Magic World by Chaosium, which was a simplified version of RuneQuest, kind of a generic fantasy game that's kind of a boiled down version of RuneQuest. So they just translated that into Swedish and released it in 1982. And that sort of started taking off, but then they did a new version in 84, where they changed a lot and it was much more its own thing, even though it still had the same kind of base. And that game from 1984 really took off and became a huge thing. It was the kind of game that was almost everywhere in most homes, I'd say, at least where any home with a teenager usually had a copy of Drakar och Demoner, in the house. It was everywhere. It was like Monopoly. It was super common. So it was a big thing. And this game, it's of course, the name is inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, I would assume, but back then, I guess, that was, but it's quite different. Mechanically, it's different because it's more built on kind of the RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu type of mechanics. And it's less mechanically complex. It's more focused a bit more on storytelling. It's more rules light, but it's also a generic open fantasy game. Mm-hmm. Most editions, it's been a few editions throughout the years, have always had that lighter touch. Like you can play, anthropomorphic animals have always been a part of it. Like you can, the ducks and things like that. So that kind of puts a spin on the game that it's not super serious. Mm-hmm. So then there have been many different editions throughout the years. I think ours is number 10 or 11, depending on how you count in Sweden. But this is the first time from the very first edition that was, Magic World being translated, but now we're kind of doing it the same Drakar och Demoner in English under the name Dragonbane, because we felt it'd be fun to see how this game, whether that would work for an international audience who have no relation to the game or the brand.
Right.
And that's a bit of an experiment, but we thought it'd be interesting just to see, because it's shaping up to be a pretty fun game. So we figured, why not do it in English as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely when I've had a quick look through the Kickstarter, as you said, it instantly, this idea with your updated version, reimagined version, apologies, but like the idea that you can all these different kingships that aren't necessarily the Dungeons and Dragons base ones, like you said, like Wolfkin, a duck person, accompanied by some amazing illustrations by Johan as well. It instantly grips people, I think. Just again, that sort of beauty about it. And like you said, the simplicity of it, this idea of rolling a D20 and getting under your skill value and having that idea of advantage, disadvantage of a boon and a bane, and then rolling a demon and rolling a dragon. I don't want to term it like Dungeons and Dragons like, because that's not what it is at all. But I feel like I would introduce people to role-playing games using the system rather than using Dungeons and Dragons, because I just feel like it's such an interesting and more imaginative way of doing it, and it's just not overwhelming at all. It's very straightforward what you can do in that front.
Yeah, absolutely what we're kind of hoping for also, because that's one of the reasons we actually decided to do it in English is precisely that. We have other fantasy RPGs, but we felt this one is perfect to be if you meet someone who has perhaps not played a lot of role-playing games before, and it's like a bit overwhelmed by all of these games. It's like, where should I start? And this, for us, is like the perfect game to put into the hands of that person. It's like, try this game, just it has everything you need in this box, and it's straightforward, easy to get into and easy to play. And that's, so yeah, it's definitely has some of that, that you mentioned. It's that kind of straightforward mechanics and easy to get into, and that's kind of what we want to do with it. It's also for experienced role players, can be done for but yes, it definitely is a good game for beginners.
And I mean, congratulations on that Kickstarter as well, funding it in 4 minutes as well. And just looking at the number of stretch goals, you have like lots of adventures planned for it, and obviously using a variety of famous authors as well. That's actually really exciting, because I think for previous Free League stuff, you've done the same thing, that you've got as scenarios coming out and all that sort of thing. But I was just like, wow, there's so much here and so different. It was for me, I was like, this is actually really exciting and stuff. So I was wondering if you could talk about maybe some of the reimagined stuff that you did, because like, from what I read on the Kickstarter, obviously you've got that sort of historical Dragonbane sort of like sort of that nostalgia coming in, but also with a Free League twist on it, which I always love that sort of twist that you always do. So could you tell us some of the updates, some of the reimagining stuff you have done for this for the new version?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are some parts mechanically, game-wise, that are different. I mean, we're adding something we have in our many of our other games, which use what we call the Year Zero engine. There is something called a push mechanic, where you can kind of re-roll, and to some risk or penalty of some sort, you get to re-roll a dice roll. And we added this. This is not normally part of Dragonbane or the traditionally. This is something we've added in this version as an optional rule, not to upset the purists too much, so they don't have to do it. But yeah, and we feel that's a nice twist to kind of it gives a nice little bit of extra excitement around a dice roll. So that's part in the mechanics. We're doing things like that. We're also removing some of the stuff that have been a bit problematic traditionally in the game, that, for example, combat, which is it can be quite, in the early editions, that could be quite slow and cumbersome, and it can take a long time, and we figure we don't want that. We don't want something faster, so we have kind of tweaked things to make it a bit more energetic and faster. But then there's also in the adventures that you mentioned, we have doing a combination of completely original adventures, but also some new versions of classic Dragonbane or Dragonbane adventures. Of course, they will not be familiar for an international audience, but for the Swedish audience, they're kind of fun to have something that they know a bit about, but still fresh and new. And we're kind of taking what we feel kind of captures the feeling of the best of the early stuff, and also working with some of the authors who wrote some of that early stuff, but also we have new authors who are just, younger authors who are just starting out. So we have a bit of a mix of the old and the new also among the team of writers. So that's really what we want to capture with the whole game, is that, yes, there is a piece of nostalgia and then, and like a heritage of this game, but it's not a retro copy of a game. It's a new game for now that has a history, but it's definitely a modern game for now, for this age.
And just to talk quickly about the core book itself, you've described sort of that there's going to be sort of a campaign setting known as Misty Vale. I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, because from what I understand from very little knowledge of the original game, there wasn't necessarily a setting to begin with. Obviously, with expansions and stuff, there was some. So is this a brand new setting completely, or is it a reimagined one? I'd be very interested to know.
Yeah, no, it's basically what we are doing. This area, the Misty Vale, it's not a continent. It's not the whole world that we're describing. It's just one valley, maybe. Yeah, so it's maybe 100 miles wide or something. So not huge. It's fairly. So basically, the idea is that we describe this area in some detail, but we're not stating what's outside of it. So you can kind of create your own world, or use, place it in the world of your choosing. So it's fairly setting agnostic in that sense. So this Misty Vale is just the setting for the introductory adventures. All of them, I think we have 9 now or something.
Yes.
So they will all be set in this area if you want them to, but we are not describing the entire world, what's outside, and that's intentional. Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes back to the early editions, that they were also setting agnostic. They did not have a setting as such in the game. Later, there was settings created for this game for the Swedish editions, and some people have strong emotions and played a lot in these settings. But we feel this should be also to make it more easily accessible. We also don't want a detailed setting that you kind of have to learn before you can play the games. We're kind of leaving that for later. So this is more of a micro setting that more than a complete world. And then we will probably explore more parts of the setting later on in expansions and so on. But basically we want to keep it fairly open and leave much also to be created by, because we have stuff created by the community and so we don't want to lock down the world, but rather create a toolbox for players and groups to use.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I was going to ask if you plan to do expansions book, because of course you would. It makes total sense. And yeah, like I think you alluded to it there a little bit, but there is plans to have an open license with Dragonbane as well, like you have done with other previous Free League products as well, which is so wonderful. And I wish more RPG companies would encourage that, because you get such vibrant communities around. I've spoken to other colleagues who obviously have done Merkborg and Death in Space and stuff, and how generating content and people are really excited and want to create their own and just be able to share it with people. So I'm always a big sort of fan of those open licenses. And actually at the end, one of the other stretch goals that you folks put in is a solo mode. Was that a deliberate decision? Because as someone, I play a lot of solo RPGs myself, and I'm always grateful that it is put into these games. So obviously you had it for the One Ring and all that sort of thing. Just that having a chance to do solo mode, was that a deliberate decision you wanted to do for Dragonbane?
Yeah, it's something we've been more and more doing more and more recently, and we think it's a nice addition, because one of the obvious, hindrance. I mean, it can be an obstacle to have the time or get a group together. I mean, so it's great to have a way to play an RPG even without that if you want to. So we've just been doing it now. I mean, for the One Ring, and for some of the other games as well. We're doing it for Vaesen, we're doing it for Twilight 2000 and so on. So, and we figured it would make sense. I mean, I think it's just a way to, because this game we want to be playable by everyone, and giving, offering a solo mode is a way to just have more people try it out. We're also doing virtual tabletops, which is another way of making the game more playable and accessible on even if you can't gather 4 people around a table every time. So it's definitely something where solo modes and virtual tabletops are 2 ways of kind of making the game easier for people to get into and try out and play. So yeah, it's probably something we'll try to do for in most of the games that we do. I mean, where it's possible. For some games, it's a bit harder depending on the game, how it works. But yeah, generally, it's something that we do a lot of that right now.
Yeah, as someone, I appreciate, like you said, it's not an obstacle, but it is kind of an obstacle when you don't have the required 3 minimum people to play a game. And so for me as well, because I like learning the game through playing it. So having a solo mode, so I know obviously Call of Cthulhu does a similar thing where you can play through the scenario and learn the rules as in. So yeah, I can totally see that as well. And I've just started my own solo play of the One Ring as well. So what was the most challenging part for when you sort of, obviously you're at the end of this project now, it's coming out, you're doing the Kickstarter, all that stuff. What was the most challenging part for you bringing it forward? Was it necessarily the writing, or was it more, I don't know, expectations, that sort of thing? Because it's obviously such a big project, as you sort of alluded to, such a big thing in Sweden.
Probably, yeah, like you said, that it's here. It's a lot of people have strong opinions about it, and they all have their favorite edition and strong opinions on how Dragonbane or Dragonbane should be, and what is, this is, if you do this, it's no longer Dragonbane for me anymore, it's something else. And there's a lot of that which you get every time you make a new edition of a beloved game with a long history. So I think it's been a lot of fun, but also a bit challenging sometimes to manage all of these expectations that you get on the game. So that's been, interesting and fun, but also challenging, sure. So that's like you said, it's mostly or on the Swedish side of things, where people have some kind of expectations on what this will be. So.
Of course. Well, then, was there a particular part that you did find like this was like, oh, this is amazing? What was the most fun part of this process to bring Dragonbane to the world?
One thing that was great fun is that, we play test every game we do, obviously, first internally, and then we have external play tests and so on. But this one we play tested for quite a long time through, we internally, and just getting back into this world and building it. It's really built by play testing a lot. So that process was a lot of fun, and just, the very creative spirit that in this group where we tested things, changed it, played again, and we played through all of these. There were the adventures back then were, some of them were just drafts and some were more done and so on, but we played through all of this stuff, and that was a lot of fun, and I think it made led to a better game in the end, to have that kind of creative process of playing and designing at the same time.
What would be your main advice for somebody, anyone, a new person to Dragonbane or an experienced veteran? They're picking up your book. What would be your main advice for them to run a game in Dragonbane? I
think for this game, it's a good advice to kind of relax a bit and have fun and not be, it's okay to be a bit, silly at the table. You don't have to be super, super serious. There are games that needs to be played straight and serious. Otherwise they break down. This one doesn't really do that. If you have a duck wizard throwing fireballs, it's okay to laugh. It doesn't have to be. It's fine. So I think that kind of attitude is probably, if you want to, it's probably not the game for you. If you want to keep it, super grim, dark, and serious, then it's probably not. There are other games that work better if that's what you want. So absolutely, yeah. But this one, keep it light and fun. I think that's the best advice.
That's just good advice for RPGs in general, to be honest. But I agree. Yeah. If you want your grim, dark stuff, maybe Twilight.
Yes,
perhaps.
Definitely. Oh yeah.
My final question is that, is there any sort of future plans that you could talk about, obviously? But if not, where can we find Dragonbane? Where can we get it? And where can we find, if we want to find out more about Free League, where can we go on the internet to find it?
Yeah, right. We have lots of plans for the game. Expansions, mostly adventure expansions that we're starting on now. But that's definitely stuff coming. And right now, the Kickstarter is still rolling for another week when this is recorded. So there's that. So you can just find it fairly easily on Kickstarter, Dragonbane. And and also Free League, you can find us, we have, social media, and also freeleaguepublishing.com is our website. You can find all of our stuff there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. I appreciate having a very quick chat about it. Yeah, I really enjoyed the quick start, and I'm really looking forward to when the final copy comes out and playing games in it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I'm hoping to do more of these special Q&A bonus episodes in future, including Q&As on the one-shots we've done here at What Am I Rolling? If you have a question or think of an RPG designer you'd like to see interviewed on this podcast, let us know. Our email address is whatamirollingpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Great. See you next time.